Women's International League for Peace and Freedom show, The Wake Up Call, on WCOM LP, Chapel Hill and Carver, 103.5 on your FM dial, or live streaming at WCOMFM.org. You can also watch the show on the People's Channel after a week's delay on Thursday night at 10 p.m., Friday morning at 6 a.m., or Tuesday at noon. The show will also be available on our YouTube channel, Wake Up Call. I'm Schwintzer here with our host, Lori Hoyt, and Emily Keel on the camera. Today our special guest is LaTandra Strong.
Thanks, Iris. We're just getting a tiny bit of a late start, so what you heard at the very beginning was, I think, from last week. So this week, as Iris just said, our guest is LaTandra Strong, and she is a strong woman, and we're going to talk about all the strong things that she's doing. I just want to put a word in for Emily O'Hare, who had surgery this afternoon, and I am sure is doing well. And Emily O'Keel, not O'Keel, Emily Keel is standing in for her. She's a Wilf sister also, and we're just so happy to be here, and we're going to get started. So LaTandra Strong is from Hillsborough, and she has been fighting the good fight for about 3 years. Did it start with the Orange County school system?
That's right, that's right.
Organizing about Confederate symbols, and I'm going to let her tell all about it. And now we'll get in this, and we want to hear more about this for sure. She's running for the Orange County School Board, and good for her. So LaTandra, welcome.
You are welcome.
You got here.
Yes.
And I'm glad you could make it. I know you're a busy woman, working, family, the female story.
Yes, yes. We do have to wear many hats, don't we, these days?
Many hats, many hats, yes. many balls to juggle in the air. And so you're juggling a few extra right now.
That's right, that's right. Being a candidate for Orange County Schools is a busy job.
Oh boy.
I find myself doing multiple events daily, because I think it's important to have proper representation on our school board. And so my hope is that the people will stand with me, as they have for quite some time now, as we seek to have real equity and real justice in our school system.
Absolutely. So after fighting the school board for a long time, now you're smart. You're going to be on the school board.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and I saw that the Independent recommended you with you were one of their picks.
Yeah, that was a true honor, because the Independent, as you know, is on the forefront of all things, in my mind, progressive. They try to bring a forward-thinking perspective, and so as you're filling out these surveys, when you become a candidate, you end up filling out many surveys, and when you send it to them, you just don't know. But on that day when you wake up and you see that there's an Indy star beside your name, it is truly an honor. And for those folks out there who are going to be voting, I hope you'll take a look at the article, because I think it's a great article.
I hope they do too. My only quibble with them is that I wish that they would do it earlier. It's so, especially with early voting.
Yes.
They come out a week beforehand, but it's so, early voting has just about started by the time you get your hands on it.
Yeah, so this particular season has been extremely short. As you know, we normally would have our primary in May, but this time around we're having our primary on March 3rd. And I think for all people involved, we are just like struggling trying to make this short cycle more meaningful, to give voters an opportunity to know who we are as candidates and why we think it's important for us to vote. And so I would imagine that we're all struggling in that area, trying to make that happen.
Yeah, so I was going to write them if I ever got around to it and say, please do it even 1 week earlier than you do it, so that you can get word out, because not everybody knows where the Indy is anymore.
That's
it's
right.
not as easy to find.
That's right.
Yeah,
I hear you.
But thank goodness that your name was there, because it does make a difference.
And so for the school board, it's not just my name. So
oh, I know there's 3.
There are 3, and I'd have to, I happily endorse the other ladies that were also selected. Carrie Doyle is an amazing previous teacher. She brings a lot of analysis and a rich wealth of information to the school board. And also Jennifer Moore. Jennifer Moore also is a previous teacher. And I think if we want to see the kind of school system that I think we can have, a school system that is really the hub of our community. You know, there was a time, I'm going to date myself, but there was a time that there would be civic organizations that people were involved in. You'd go to church and they'd just be bustling over with people. We found ways to be in community, but it seems like we're moving so fast and we don't have those groups like we used to in the past. And so my hope is that that our schools will become more community oriented, that we will find ways to bring people in, to bring folks in to volunteer to help with the achievement gap issues that we have. Could you imagine if we had a wealth of people who just went and got training and then would be able to volunteer for whatever time? For some it might be an hour or two every 2 weeks. For some it might be every day for an hour. Could you imagine what the impact would be for schools? And so those are the kinds of things that I want to see happen in our school district. And I think the fact that I've been involved in Orange County for a long time in the way of organizing, I've met lots of people. I think it would be awesome to bring that into our schools and try to fill in some of the shortfalls that we have in our budgets.
I think you mentioned about organizing. I think that's what really impressed me the first time you were on our program. How, you know, instead of being a lone ranger, you had, within it seemed to me a relatively short time, had about 200 people in your organization.
That's right.
And it was diverse. You came in with a co-chair who was white and you're black, and for our radio listeners, of course it's going to be on TV and on YouTube also. I just want to remind people about that. But I was just so surprised that you were able to do that in such a short time. That was amazing organizing.
Yeah. So we founded Hate Free Schools Coalition.
Hate Free Schools.
And if you want to learn more about Hate Free Schools Coalition, you can see that on hatefreeschoolscoalition.org. But we founded Hate Free Schools, and in a matter of a couple months, people had joined freely, members of the community who did not know each other, and then we would frequently get together and try to figure out how we can convince people in what seemingly is supposedly a post-racial environment that we still had some race work to do.
Yes.
And so I think people who had never considered race and the impacts of race began to explore this topic and to see how it might affect our schools. And we really began to build a community around that. So these are people who, like I said, had never, been together before. And now we're doing things like picking up each other's children when somebody can't get there. So the movement itself extended beyond the work that we were doing in the schools. And I'm just an avid advocate for the community filling in the gap and doing what they need to do for each other.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing. Already you were building community, just getting that started.
Yes.
And that was what was so impressive and heartwarming to me. I think you came here with your co-chair, and between you all came in with, I don't know, 4 or 5 kids.
Yes.
And it was a lot of really good energy. And I'm so glad we're having you back. So I think you made a good point a little earlier, how we have so much community with these different civic organizations. I don't know if it has probably a lot to do with TV, but then I think the internet has really cut into, because the people used to go to all these men's groups, and I've heard, besides you, I've heard this, I think there's a couple of books being written about it, this whole sense of civic engagement and people, even going out to the movies now, they watch them at home.
That's right.
It's so many things that people, and I don't know, and what really worries me with this whole thing with guns is people getting fearful about public spaces.
That's right.
I think all of that has been so detrimental to the sense of community and our public spaces and getting together for different things.
Yeah. So what I found is that, like, I find that people are just like hungry for something to just get around. You know?
Yeah.
And so this, something that was really big for me and my family, which was, you know, getting the Confederate flags out of our schools. For some people, there was no real impact for them, but to be able to get around something and kind of work together for it, I think that really spoke to folks. And then we found ourselves trying to find more reasons to get together because we are, I believe as humans that, like, we are here to be in community with each other.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I never forget that when I'm thinking about an action that I might be planning. As you know, as a result of our plan, we were, we had the KKK come into town.
Yeah, well, this is another whole story that we're going to talk about.
Yes.
So Hillsboro's gotten more and more exciting, hasn't
it?
That's right. And some of it good and some of it not so good.
Yes.
And our friend Emily Keel here has been real involved with a lot of that too. So tell us about that.
So the KKK came in town, I think it was April 24th, although I'm probably not wanting to remember that date, so if I got it wrong, please, August, it was in August. And within a week's time, again, we wanted to do a response because for me, it was like the KKK just doesn't come to your town in a town square and then we do nothing, right? So, and then they promised us that they would come back the next week. And so, again, the Hate Free Schools Coalition, the core team got together, and within a week, we were able to, we had planned a march, and I thought this march was going to be 200 people. In fact, when I did the permit for 200 people. And I remember when I did that, some of the folks at the county they laughed because they were like, you really think it's just going to be 200 people? And honestly, like, we were struggling to put a list together of 200 people that we knew for sure would show up. And I remember that morning when we got to the graveyard, because we started at the old slave graveyard in Hillsboro, which many people didn't know actually existed. So so we started at the slave cemetery, and I remember showing up and thinking, wow, the people let me down. There's not that many people here. And I said, well, we're going to go anyway. So we started the march, and we came out from the cemetery up to King Street and turned down King Street. And we walked all the way up, and when we got to Wake, I thought to myself, I'm going to turn around, just to make sure everybody's okay. And I turned around and I could still see people turning off of King Street. It was nearly, some of the estimations are over 1,000 people.
Wow.
1,000 people. Imagine sending a letter to, maybe 200 people and having 1,000 people show up. And what was beautiful about that is there wasn't one police incident, right? There wasn't one, there was no tension like with protesters coming around. It was all done, it happened in the spirit that we intended, and that was the spirit of love and community, and just making a statement with our connectedness, right? So this idea that the KKK would come to our town. Back in the day when the KKK showed up in the center of a square, that usually meant that somebody was going to be lynched, and so it put a lot of fear in people. But this community said it's going to bring a lot of love for people, and that's what it did. That's what it felt like for me.
So that was, and did they show up that day?
They showed up in the middle of the night. I think they heard word that something was happening, so they showed up in the middle of the night and left a bunch of propaganda, speaking ill of the different groups that are in our community that we embrace and love so much. The Jewish community, the LGBTQ community, the people of color communities, and they haven't showed up since. And if they do, this community will respond in love again.
That's wonderful, because it's been a long time since the KKK was being so active. Mm-hmm. I remember I moved here in the '60s, and I remember they were then, and I remember going to some protest in Raleigh, and they marched, and they didn't have guns, but they had these huge flashlights that they could use as weapons. I think some big thing that they carried. But, and I was so shocked, you know, I'd never seen something like that. So that was back in the 60s. But it's been quiescent. And unfortunately, I think Obama's election for people who were being kind of quiet, who still had racist ideas, but that was sort of not being actively or openly expressed so much, and started bringing some of that kind of people out, and it's now gotten worse under Trump for sure. Sort of, I think some of his rhetoric helps them feel they have permission.
Yeah, so it's a real challenge, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing white nationalist organizations expand. We're seeing
that's terrifying.
We're seeing these ideas of white supremacy being shared in places that you wouldn't normally see it, in churches sometimes, you know, in our, you know, from our White House, you see that. And so these things, to me, mean, for me, when I hear this, I think, here's a call to action, right? Here's a call for everyday people to get involved, to counter this idea that we're going to go back there, because we're not going to go back there. I think that when I'm around different groups of people, diverse groups of people, I get filled up, and so I'm excited about that, and you know, and so I want to make that the infectious thing that happens in this state, and not the bad stuff that we see going on.
Well, and the way 1,000 people showed up for a march unexpectedly shows that more people have hearts that are good and want to get along with their neighbor, want people to have peace and people to thrive in Hillsborough, rather than wanting division and violence and threats and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so aren't we fortunate? So when we have communities now where they're making themselves sanctuary states, and when you look on those sites, you see that militias are forming in those states, and like these are very, very serious things, right? And for me, you know, I am quickened to move away from that, because I don't want to live in a place where we are really concerned that people are going to be shot or violence might ensue just because somebody is. Yeah. Right? You know, not that I ever think violence is okay, but I'm saying when people just show up in a space, if that is seen as, you know, as worthy of that sort of response, I think that we as a people have to do something.
Yes, and I think that by being quiet and letting it happen in your space is giving tacit permission. And I think your whole life has been around children and making things peaceful and good, and your big focus has been on the schools in recent years. Now you have fostered some children, if I remember correctly.
I've had over 20 children in my home. So my life has really been...
Not at one time, of course.
No, over the years.
over the years.
Over 20 children, and over I want to say it's like about 10 years. And it's just been a real joy for me, you know, and I've learned so much with those children in my home, and they all come from different backgrounds and different, you know, and I think that for what it's, I often say, like when I first thought about doing foster care, I thought I was going to be a gift to some young people, and I never imagined the tremendous gift it would be for me. Right. Yeah. In the same way, when I wrote the letter in the school, I really thought, oh, I'm going to I'm going to show a blind spot. And I really had a blind spot for who we could be as a humanity, as a people, and what we could do collectively. And so, like, all these things, I think, you know, they take a toll sometimes, and they demand a lot of you, but I think what we get back is so much richer. Yeah. And so I'm, you know, when I started this, like, I had no formal training around organizing, right? I didn't really know very many people in my community. I just took action. And what I think the thing that I want to impress upon people these days is that you don't need all that stuff. You just have to have a strong belief around something and take the first step, take the first action, and you would be amazed how things come together as you form your ideas or try to advocate for change in our community.
Well, so Hillsborough is not what it was, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah. So the school board is, they finally did, but it was a long struggle to get them.
9 months.
9 months to get the Confederate to agree that the schools should not have Confederate symbols in the parking lot and in school.
Yep.
And that was the beginning of changes, I guess.
Yes, and then we ended up getting an equity department, right? So we have equity task force that have, for those, for almost those 3 years, have been exploring how we can be more equitable in our district. And then we recently hired a black female superintendent who is really a rock star in education. So we are moving forward.
So this is for the Orange County
Orange
schools.
County School Board.
So the superintendent is a black female.
Yes. Yes.
So there's a lot happening in Hillsborough. That's great. Yeah. So there's a lot of hope going on.
Hopeful for me, and so that's why it was important for me to take the next step, and that is to put myself out there, and run for Orange County School Board, and to, I think a fascinating question was asked of me before I decided to run, and I can't really take responsibility for deciding to run, because what actually happened was members of our community met with me at the Board of Election and said, "It's your time, we want you to run." So I was on my way to work, and I got a phone call, "Will you meet me at the Board of Election?" And there was members of our community saying, "We want you to work, and we want you to be on the school board." And this was at 10 o'clock on the last day of filing. So in that moment,
oh boy,
I made the decision to run, because when you
how could you say no? If
you can't say no.
No.
Yeah.
No. And you over those 3 years, you learned so much about the school board. What's good and what's not good.
Yes, I attended I missed, so most recently because of the campaign, I've missed 2 school boards back to back. But for those 3 years, I had not done that, and I actually had only missed like maybe 1 or 2 in that time frame, because there was so many decisions being made. One thing that became really clear to me was that I thought that when I went to the first school board meeting that there would be a crowd of people there, sort of serving as like watchdogs or just being informed at our school board meetings. And what I learned was people actually, once we cast that vote, we actually don't stay involved with the political process. And that's not what I think our forefathers intended for us to do. I think it's incumbent upon us to cast our vote, but also to make sure that our leaders are responding in the ways and serving in the ways that we want them to. So that was happening at the school board meeting. There was no one in attendance beyond those that were getting awards, and the same thing was happening at our commissioners meeting. So as a result of learning that, what we see now is that those meetings are being attended more frequently with just members of our communities just trying to stay informed, and then those folks are sharing what they're learning when they go to those meetings.
So it makes a difference if the school board or the commissioners see that people are paying attention, their eyes are upon them.
Could you imagine? Can you imagine?
I think we're going to have a station break, LaTandra. We're talking to LaTandra Strong, and we're going to have a station break, and then we'll be back.
This is Will's Wake Up Call on WCOM LP, Chapel Hill and Carver, 103.5 FM. You can stream us live at WCOMFM.org.
Does anybody have any announcements? I have been real busy, so I have not looked up if there's anything going on. LaTandra, is there something that going on in Hillsborough you'd like to announce? We make announcements at the time of the station break. Well, that's okay. I'm sure there's good things happening, but we're not going to announce them today. So we're talking to LaTandra Strong. This is the Wolf Wake Up Call, and we're in downtown Carborough on our usual Wednesday afternoon, and LaTandra Strong is running for the Orange County School Board after 3 years of working with them to improve things in the school.
Yes.
And doing a lot of organizing in Hillsborough to make the community a better and more peaceful and more open place for good things to happen.
That's for sure.
Yeah. I think you had wanted to ask her something about Pittsburgh, Emily?
Well, I was there when you, and I can't remember the name of the other lady from Pittsburgh. I was there when you and the Stephanie
Yes.
gave a rousing speech about being peaceful.
Yes,
And in 5 minutes, it turned into a not peaceful event.
that's right.
And I could see the disappointment on your faces,
Yes,
and it continues to be that way.
yes.
There have been Confederate flag bearers in Pittsburgh this weekend, and I think yesterday. And so, what would your thoughts have been? What would you have said actually to them, or what would your actions have been?
Yeah, so I wondered about how I could move the needle or help move the needle in Pittsburgh. So there's this idea.
Well, maybe we should back up and
yeah.
just say that, like Hillsborough, Pittsburgh has also been beset by white supremacists coming in. Was this after Hillsborough?
Yes, Hillsborough,
so.
the Chatham County Board decided to remove the
That's right.
Confederate flag in front of the courthouse.
Courthouse, yeah.
And so that instigated this sort of protest from the Confederate enthusiasts.
Yes, and we should mention to people that a lot of these come from out of town or other places.
That's
also,
right.
yes.
That's right.
So Pittsburgh has had some difficulties with that kind of white supremacist or Confederate protest.
Yes.
So that's what we're referring to now.
Yes.
So
there is this idea that when you have Confederates that come in and white nationalists, especially when it's violent groups, that you should make efforts to deplatform. And so I think the folks that are going down to Pittsburgh are doing that from a place of peace, because if you allow white supremacists and white nationalists to sort of be around and reign, it's potentially, we could see another Charlottesville, and so we don't want that in Pittsburgh. So the conflict on that particular day was we had invited people from the community to come down, right? And so for me, I had to draw the line at the level of safety, because when you are sort of challenging people's ideas, and you have innocent folks who are not who have never seen that sort of protest, for me that was unsafe. And since I organized that rally, I did not want anyone to be an innocent bystander and get hurt. So I asked that we shut it down. But I'm not so convinced that that we should be out there and we should be fighting the way we're fighting with them. Sometimes I think that invites that, it emboldens them, it gives them something sort of to be angry at. I think people have good intentions and good hearts, and I appreciate the folks that are going out, standing up and saying, no, this is not what Pittsburgh is about. But as we see, the other side is getting larger, right? We see more organizations coming, right? So what is it going to take for them to stop coming? And it's not just don't deal with the monuments, right? Because what we learned is those organizations were not formed when that monument came down. Those organizations were already formed, already active, already doing stuff, and was waiting for something to sort of show up with. So but those the solution to this is for people beyond just the folks that are deplatforming and the folks that are protesting to talk more, right? And to think about what's important for them, and to be about doing actions for that. So you mentioned nonviolence. So if you notice, as long as we protested at the school board, as long as we protested against the KKK, there was never a time when we as hate-free schools or the people that were protesting with us ever demonstrated any type of violence. Because to me, you know, I have the benefit of those from the civil rights movement, and they worked very hard to be nonviolent, to be compliant with the laws. And so if you ever are invited to a protest that I'm involved with, it's going to be a nonviolent protest, because I think civil disobedience under the guise of nonviolence is the best way to demonstrate.
I totally agree with you, because violence does beget violence, and that gives them what they want. You know, they're itching for that, and I think that to play into that is so unnecessary. And I think you're right to keep that nonviolent stance and to not engage them in that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
But to do nothing is also not okay,
Yeah.
right? So what we have going on in Pittsboro is, I mean, I don't want to say people are doing nothing, but I don't think enough people are being involved with that to show that is not the Pittsboro that they want to have. And so I would encourage folks from that area to find ways to get involved with their own level of comfort, because that's also important. But I think more people need to pay attention to that, because now we have two sort of groups that have been there and committed to kind of, you know, having a tug of war, and it seems like they have the same strength. And so how long are they going to hold on to that rope before somebody just puts it down and say peace is more important?
Yeah. Well, there's a way to stand there quietly, prayerfully, that I think would be very different than a confrontational. A lot has to do with how, you know, your demeanor.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult situation, and everybody can be in a nonviolent sort of demeanor and behavior, but then it takes one or two who come up and then can start calling out or whatever. It's very difficult.
The other thing that needs to happen, I think, down there is we need some strong education in our police departments about protests, the protest laws. You know, I'm not blaming the police at all. I just think that we're in a new phase of protests where they're becoming more regular and more frequent. And I think police need to know things like you can't have a flag on a pole. So when you see the pictures, there are always flag poles. In the instant, those flag poles can become weapons. And so I'm wondering, why are we violating so many rules when it comes to protesters? Not for the folks that are a part of the community that want peace, but for the folks that are coming from out of community, coming in with weapons and coming in to spread nasty, what I think is nasty propaganda.
Yeah, and looking for trouble, and that's what they're looking for, to get their name in the paper.
And it's working, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so you have become a community leader in Hillsborough and elsewhere, and now you're running for school board. Do you have a platform? Do you have some goals that you're hoping to?
So my goals are. So the first thing that I think is critical for our schools is to raise the achievement of our schools. You know, I fight a lot for equity, because we know that Brown versus Board of Education did not make segregated schools. We know that we don't have actually the education for Black and brown children that we would want. So we didn't actually get out of that case what we wanted to. And so now I think it's time that we examine how we're educating students. But for me, it's not just about Black and brown students, because guess what else is happening? It's amazing that white students aren't performing as well as they used to either. So we see that our numbers used to be in the 90 percentile in terms of the score that you would get from DPI, and now those numbers are in the 80s, 83 I think it is. So my hope would be that we could raise the achievement of all students. My second platform issue is on safety. I think that we could do more to make our schools safer. we could do more. You know, and I roll into safety, not just the off chance that we might have a shooter. And I think parents should know what the plan would be if something like that happens. But I also roll into that the safety of our LGBTQ students, our immigrant students, who are living with I think in a very like trauma focused world, when they don't know if when they come home from school their parents are going to be there, or if students are being bullied because they're different than other students. So safety, I think we need to have a stronger safety plan, and we need to communicate that with our families so that our families know when they drop their kids off, they have a sense that everything is going to be okay during the day. Thirdly, I think we need to confront the redistricting. For as long as I have been a part of Orange County Schools, every so many years reassignment comes up. And they say, we need to redistrict our schools, we have overcrowding in these schools, we need to balance out our achievement, we need to balance out our socioeconomic impact, and yet we haven't done anything yet. And so I would advocate for us to move forward with achievement, but not to do it in the way that we have this last time, where we just like had an outside community come in and consult with our board and then put a plan together, and then we announced the board. And what it did was it left some really bad feelings with members of our communities. We didn't think about how they would impact those communities. So I would hope that we would look at reassignment in conjunction with our schools and our school community, so that when we do come up with a plan, it's a plan that everybody has bought into. And then finally, you know, I talked about community engagement earlier. I talked about some of my ideas, other ideas about ways we can connect with the business community. Would be like to have a job shadowing, to have folks, to have people companies in the community tell us what they're looking for from students, and then to partner with them and get students skilled. These are the sort of things that we can do if we think about our education system, not just for the system itself, but the system in conjunction with the community.
Yeah. Well, and I thought with the achievement gap, and it's interesting that it's affecting the white kids too. Mm-hmm. I'm a strong believer that when they started taking all the teachers' aides out, I felt they couldn't afford that. I felt it was a tremendous mistake, especially in the early grades.
That's right.
Because for a teacher to have, I don't know how many, 25, 30, 35 kids, when you think of first graders, and even second, and maybe even up to third grade, and there's always a few kids who need that extra help or extra support. Right. And you're talking about so many kids these days are maybe traumatized. There's so much bullying going on. So, you know, I just think that idea that you had earlier about getting community volunteers, if we can't get teachers' aides in, which I think would be ideal, because they could be a consistent, for those early grades.
That's right. That's
a consistent person in those early grades there with the teacher. So having those volunteers though would be at least something, so the teacher has some backup, and then she could help with the kids who need that extra help, and leave maybe the volunteers to read a story to the kids who are doing okay. I mean, there's so many creative things that could be done, but I think that when you talk about that redistricting and how they bring in these, I've heard that before about bringing in these outside consultants who maybe are brilliant, but they really are not part of the community, and too often things are done without enough input from the teachers or the community.
That's right. And then what happens is, so they announce what potentially could be the new plan. There's an uproar, people protest, and they stop. Is that leadership? Is that how leadership looks? Not for me. So, you know, I would, you know, so that's why I bring that up. Many people seem to think, and I will speak to this issue because I think it's important for people in the community to know. People think that when I say that we need to move forward in redistricting, that what I'm really saying is that we need to close the year-round school in our district, and that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying that leaders face problems and find solutions. We don't just shy away from them because we don't have an ability to sell it to our communities. and I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah, and keeping the community informed more, and
That's right.
having those discussions and getting people going into their communities to have some of those discussions. I mean, there's so much that could be done.
Yes.
But it's what's really sad. I mean, in the paper today, there's about the whole LaTandra case, and the difference in the wealthier schools put up something like over $3,000 more per child, and the poorest schools, and your heart breaks with this, maybe it was at $752 versus $3,000.
Yeah.
I mean, people say, well, money can't solve these problems. No, it won't solve them. It takes creative leadership, but it also does take money. And when you think about hearing that some of the schools have leaks or mold, I mean, that is not a conducive, safe learning environment for the kids. And the other thing that's one of my big bugaboos with schools too is I've heard, and I'd be interested in your input on that. I've read studies that the quality of the principal is one of the most important aspects of how a school does, more than money per student, about racial mix or whatever, that the teacher sets the tone for the school. And I remember when my kids were in school back in upstate New York, and one of the schools had this wonderful principal, and he was there saying goodbye to all the kids. When they went, they all, it was, the whole atmosphere in that school felt so good when you walked in.
Right.
And that makes a difference somehow, the whole culture of safety in the school.
That's right.
And I'd be interested in
Yeah, so we all have had that fantastic principal that just like, even if you thought you were going to be in trouble, you wanted to impress that principal.
Yeah.
And that principal really moved you to be your best student.
Yeah.
Right.
And was fair.
And was fair.
And yeah.
Yeah. So what I think we have amazing teachers and we have amazing principals in our schools. I think our system has been kind of turbulent in the past, and so even for teachers and even for principals, we used to have a person that kind of like mentored our new principals that came in. We don't have that anymore.
Oh, really?
Yes, and then you think about the gaps that we have in our central office and gaps that we have in education office. That's why I'm excited about Dr. Felder. She's already had 2 new hires, principal hires, and when you look at the resume and when you look at the quality of administrator those new principals are, you just think, wow, we're headed in the right direction. And so I, as a school board member, am excited about working closely with Dr. Felder and supporting her as she advocate for the changes that we are to see in our community.
So there's a lot of hope right now with
Yes.
this new superintendent, and with going to be a new school board.
Yep.
So there's a lot of hope that your ideas and the other ones who are getting on the school board, their ideas will have the support working with this new superintendent.
Yes.
to make some of those changes that can be so critical for the schools. Yeah.
Yeah. Even for people who think that school systems they've already raised their children or they don't have any children, and I want them to look closely, because when we have solid schools, everything else happens favorably. I think our communities become more sought after. We can do economic development in a different way. If we repair our schools, then we end up having this like domino effect in other aspects in our community. I was thinking the other day, I said to a friend of mine, I said, when you go look for a house, you don't call and say, do you have a great animal shelter there? Or you don't say, what's your recycling plan, right?
Yeah.
What we often say is, how are the schools?
How are the schools?
How are the schools? So the schools are, to me, a huge indicator of what's happening and what's right about our community, and I just want to be a part of making that right. By the way, I've been critical of our system because I've been engaged with our system, and I want to say that I absolutely love living in Hillsborough. I have a choice just like other folks. And it's because I love Hillsborough and I see what's possible for us in the future that I'm advocating for these changes, because I know the hearts of the people, and they want to see these types of changes in our community.
Yeah, well, it's a good community, and to be critical doesn't mean you don't love it.
That's right.
Yeah, but because you're not only a person, in the way I see it, who's been critical, you're the person who tries to do something to make it better.
Yes.
You know, some people can grouse and complain, and that's all they do.
That's right.
But you've rolled up your sleeves
Yep,
and put yourself on the line to try to make it better, and that's a different thing.
Yes, yes.
That's when you do love something, whether it's your family or your kid. You know, you stick with it, and you see that it's not perfect, but you say, I'm going to work to make this better for this person or this school or this community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So you have some really good ideas, and it sounds like there's a lot of hope right now. Yeah. And are you going to still have time for some of this other activism, or are you gonna, all those balls?
Who knows what it's going to look like afterwards? The schools will become my primary interest.
Yeah.
You know, hate-free schools is not just in Orange County. We are in 7 counties in Virginia and North Carolina, because people saw what we've done here, and they wanted to echo that in their communities. And so, you know, I lead some of the change that's happening in other communities. So, you know, I think we're really fortunate to have the community that we have.
That's become a model.
And people are paying attention to what we're doing because of the work that we're doing here.
Well, I take it, I know you brought one child with you. You still have some children at home.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I love being a parent.
Yeah.
You know, when I see the children that come into my home, and when they blossom and start their own lives, and you see the change that they want to do. Like I have a teenager who won last year. She won an award to start her own nonprofit, and she wants to do a nonprofit around a support group for students that experience racism or sexism or any one of the isms in their class. And I thought, wow, you know, as a young person, at 16 years old, understanding that is, you know, that there's a need for something like that is remarkable. And so you know, it's really awesome to me to be able to impact children in that way.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to be doing.
Wow, so remember what you said at the beginning, that you thought you were going to be a gift to these children, but you've learned so much from them.
Yes.
And that 16-year-old sounds like we could all learn something. How smart. Instead, again, of decrying these problems, to go and say, well, I'm going to be part of getting this support group going for kids who have those needs.
That's right.
I mean, again, it's solution-oriented, which is really so much better than just grousing and complaining and feeling bad about it. So are you going to, it sounds like you're still going to have time for some of your activism, and you have connections then with 7 states?
Seven
communities?
7 communities in 2 states.
In 2 states?
Yes. And
I didn't know about that part. That's
I mean, I've always also been fortunate to do speaking engagements around colleges in this community. You know, there's this idea that, like, where does the line of free speech, what is the responsible line in our exercise of free speech? And so lots of colleges are weighing that and thinking about that. And so I was invited 2 weeks ago to University of Virginia and did a talk and met Mary Tinker. So, you know, it was an honor to actually meet her and to find out that she was a supporter of the work that we're doing.
wow.
Yeah, so, you know, this work has taken me far, and like I said earlier, it's only been a gift for me.
Well, we have a few minutes left. We're talking to LaTandra Strong, who is a strong advocate for schools, for social justice, and for peace, and for love in the communities. And do you want to tell people? Do you need help with your campaign? Do you want people to call in, write in? Make sure they vote.
Yep, so please come out and vote. We have early voting, is available now. And then on March the 3rd is a vote. If you're interested, we're gonna have a watch party at Gatewood, we think. So it would be great to corral as a community on that night. If you want to know more about my campaign, you can go to strongforocschool.com.
That's a great.
Yep. And also, if you're interested in volunteering, there's buttons there that you can push. And
Strong for OCS.
.com.
Schools.
No.
.com.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where they can find out more about you and your campaign.
That's right. That's right.
And so that's a good way to get in touch with you. If they
Yes.
want to invite you to something. Or?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, I really, when I say I want to find ways for our communities to get involved. If you have some ideas, if you have organizations that you think that might benefit our schools, please go to Orange for OCS. There's a button that you can push, and then to contact me. I would love to speak with you more. And if you have any questions about me as a candidate, I would also welcome a conversation.
So any way to get in touch with you personally, if you have questions, suggestions, Strong for OCS, that's orangecountyschools.com.
That's right.
And that sounds pretty easy. I want to thank LaTandra Strong. We're celebrating Black History Month, and she's helped us celebrate it. And next Wednesday, we're going to have Renee Price and Barbara Fouché, and maybe a few other coming to us to talk about the census. They're quite concerned about that people are not put off or intimidated, and how important it's going to be to fill out what you need to fill out. So do tune in next week. We're here every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m. and we're also on YouTube and on the People's Channel. LaTandra Strong, thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
And good luck.
Thank you.